All right, next thing we have to talk about is our asset turnover. And so we'll begin our paragraph. Again, we'll have our introduction. Typically picks up the same thing we had from our overall change. And then we're going to look at the individual contributing and offsetting factors. So let's go ahead and take a look at our ROE decomposition template. Again, overall, our asset turnover ratio increased from 1.69 to 2.48. So overall, our asset turnover increased, and we said that means we've had an improvement in our operating performance. In terms of comparison to the industry, we're now generating $2.48 in sales for every dollar in assets. The industry is only at 2, so we are definitely more efficient than the industry average. Let's look at the individual components. Our accounts receivable turnover increased from 4.5 to 5.7. So AR turnover, that increased. And if our turnover increases, that's better. And again, turnover increased, overall asset turnover increased, as well did our accounts receivable turnover. So it was a contributing factor. In terms of industry comparison, we're still what? Below or worse than the industry average. So we're worse than the industry average. Now, your preference, you can either talk about turnover ratios for things like accounts receivable, or you can talk about accounts receivable period in days. Our AR period in days went from 80 to 63. It decreased, but in terms of evaluation, we're collecting faster. It's the same evaluation. That's better. And again, same evaluation. If we're collecting receivables faster, our receivables are turning over faster. That's contributing to the overall trend. And again, we can see in terms of comparison to the industry, on average it takes the industry, our competitors, 57 days to collect. It's now taking us 63. So we've gotten better, but again, we're still worse than the industry average. Moving on down our list, inventory turnover. Our inventory was turning over 1.94 times per year. We've improved it. Our inventory is turning over much quicker now, 3.68 times per year. So our inventory turnover has increased, which again, that's always better. We're more efficient. And it was the same change as our asset turnover in total, so it contributed to the improved asset turnover. Compared to the industry has a turnover of 4.3 times per year. So we're not quite there. So we've gotten better, but we're still worse than the industry on a whole. We could again talk about in terms of days. Our inventory period in days went from 188 days to turn over or sell our inventory on average. Now it's sitting around for 99 days. So period, our inventory period decreased. And again, in terms of evaluation, it doesn't matter whether we're looking at turnovers or periods in days, it's the same thing. One of the first things you can do to indicate to me you don't know what the heck you're talking about is tell me that the inventory turnover increased, which is better and contributed, and the inventory period decreased, which is worse and offset. So try not to talk about both. Pick one to talk about and leave the other one out. Fixed asset turnover. We were turning over 71, now we're at 38. Typically, again, we don't really think about fixed assets in terms of turnover, but this means that we have $71 in sales for every dollar invested in fixed assets back in 1988. Now we've got $38 in fixed or sales for every dollar in fixed assets. So our fixed asset turnover has decreased, which is worse. We're not quite as efficient with our fixed assets. Now that's not surprising because as our sales we found tripled, and it's taking us some time. Our inventories are what? Our warehouses are overflowing with inventory. Our delivery trucks are jam-packed. We don't have enough in fixed assets to keep pace with this rapid level of sales growth. So it's not surprising that our asset turnover over time, fixed asset turnover, will go down. In fact, generally we find turnovers tend to move towards industry averages. Now again, it decreased. Overall asset turnover increased, so this was an offsetting trend. Despite the decrease, we are still what? Better than the industry average. Other asset turnover. We can look at some of our other assets. We can do that by looking at our balance sheet as a percentage of sales. Let's consider our prepaid expenses. We had $3 or 3.5 cents in prepaid expenses for every dollar in sales, or we could say we had $3.56 in prepaids for every $100 in sales. Now it's down to 2. So our level of prepaid expenses relative to assets has decreased. Same thing we saw with what? Receivables and inventory. So as assets as a percentage of sales goes down, we would say our asset turnover has increased, which again we said was better and would have contributed to the overall trend. Industry comparison, we don't really have an industry comparison to make. So we'll just put a question mark. In terms of days sales in cash, let's go ahead and take a look at that one. Our days sales in cash was 6.8. In other words, we had on average 7 days worth of sales on hand in terms of cash. Then we were down to 0.21. Now we're at 1.33. We're becoming incredibly efficient at running our business with next to nothing in the way of cash. And we can see that by looking at our balance sheet. Recall that our net sales have nearly tripled over the past 3 years. But if we look at our balance sheet, our cash and securities have actually gone down. Now, from an efficiency perspective, that's great, but there's no way to run nearly a billion-dollar business with only $353,000 in cash. So from an efficiency perspective, this is absolutely wonderful. We have increased our day sales in cash has decreased, which is, from an efficiency perspective, it's much better. And it tends to contribute to our overall trend. From comparison to the industry, we are much better than the industry. Back in 1988, we had about as much cash as every other company has on hand. But now we've got very little cash on hand. So again, from an efficiency perspective, we have gotten much better. But one thing we're going to want to keep in mind is that from a liquidity concern, oh yes, we've got some definite liquidity concerns because we almost ran out of cash the year before last. So we've evaluated our ratios. We've got our first sentence talking about what happened overall. Then we, of course, have our sentence that identifies the contributing factors, which were our receivable turnover, our inventory turnover, our other asset turnover, and lower levels of cash. And there's my sentence. Inventory and receivables, which account for roughly 90% of LA Gear's total assets, are the primary sources of the improvement. And decreasing levels of cash have also contributed to the overall trend, while slowing fixed asset turnover is the one and only partially offsetting factor. Then again, we follow the same format. I want a sentence at least on each one of these. LA Gear has shortened its collection period from 81 to 63 days, which is now close to the industry average of 57 days. And there's our inventory or our collection period information. Next, tell me about the inventory. Inventory has decreased from 188 days to 99 days, and it's approaching the industry average of 85 days. We might be, again, we can't tell, but we might be lowering our prices to improve our inventory turnover. Things will sell faster if they're priced better. That will generate higher sales, and it's also consistent with our lower gross profit margins. Again, we don't know for certain by looking at our ratios, but I'm just guessing around. Also contributing to LA Gear's improving asset turnover were the lower levels of cash. Day sales dropped from 6.8 to 1.33. On the downside, it might signal some liquidity problems. Again, the one trend in the opposite direction was our fixed asset turnover, which went from 71 down to 38, but it's still better than the industry average of 16.77.